But one of the things that I found most interesting in the book was this idea that companies hire you, and I find this as well in my own work. Companies will hire you, and they'll say things like, the problem around here is communication. If we could just get communication right, that would be great. And in my younger years, what I would do is I would earnestly study up on communication, and I'd read every HBR article written on the topic, and I'd call all my friends that were communication consultants, and I'd arrive at the firm, and it would turn out that there was actually a CEO succession underway, and the three VPs who were, in line to, one of them was going to be picked. There was no communication problem. They communicated perfectly. They just hated each other's guts and they were fighting with each other, which you touch on in your book in terms of politics. So, but this theme of, you ostensibly get brought in to fix a brand, and what actually happens is you find you have to change the organization.
It's a classic issue here, because what happens is that I think the issue is the closer you are to the forest, the less you can see the trees for the forest. And I do think this is an issue for companies as they grow older. Here's what I've learned. I've learned that if you take an entrepreneurial company, let's take a quick story. Two young kids off their heads smoking weeds in a dorm room. And then one day the kid is shooting a photo of his friend and upload it on social, and everything goes berserk, and mom and dad is furious. And of course he says, I wish I could retract this photo. And that later on became Snapchat, a $50 billion company. What happened in that moment was kind of a sense of empathy. And remember, empathy is the ability to place yourself in the shoes of another person's point of view and feel what that person is feeling. And that's what they did. That's what entrepreneurial companies almost always do. And that feeling is such a strong drive that it takes you through the evolution of the company as it grows. But here's what's happening. As companies grow, the founders decide, think about Google. The companies certainly have lawyers and legal functions and all that stuff coming on board. And suddenly they slowly disconnect from an outside-in point of view to an inside-out point of view, where the world they deal with is no longer the customer world, it's their own little world of compliance, which become real. And I think the best example of that is when I was spending a lot of time with one of the largest banks in the world, which really had that problem you're talking about. And I went to the 29th floor to talk to the head of compliance. And she was a lovely lady. And I said to her, how long time have you worked here? She said, I worked here for 17 years. And I said, so what is your number one deliverable? She said, I produced 1,271 rules. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. I said, and she immediately took this Yellow Pages book-like device, slammed it in front of mine on my lap. And I was flicking through all these rules, and that was a lot of rules he writes. And I landed at page 200 and something while she was talking about her goal of creating rules. And the rule was saying something like, whenever you have a signed contract, do always ensure to post it, to email it, and to send it by fax. And I said to her, do you have a fax machine? She said, no. Looked at me like a deer in the headlight. I said, but that's a rule. Why don't you get rid of the rules? He said, why should I? I mean, I'm paid to produce rules, not to delete my own work. And I think that's kind of symptomatic for what's happened with the companies. They suddenly become so engraved in their own red tape that straitjacket becomes so tight that they can't see the world from multiple points of view. Empathy disappears, is now flipped to nonsense, because that's the opposite of common sense, of course. And then suddenly we end up with the problem you talk about. Our brand doesn't work, our product doesn't work, but in reality, their point of view is just wrong.